my very first win, and that win, that reason I call it my very first win is my very first $100 million+ kind of revenue deal, and I think that's the thing that was like unlocked in me what it takes to, as a very, very small company. Lambda at that point of time was barely few tens of millions, maybe touching $100 million revenue valuation marker. How do you kind of deal with a behemoth, which is Microsoft, which is a multi-trillion-dollar company at the point in time, and how do you kind of go through and convert them into being your customer, into believing your technologies?
Hello, welcome back to another edition of Very First Win. I am your host, Robert Hilmer, also founder of Goanna Capital. Goanna is a technology-focused investment firm, and we are shareholders of Canva, OpenAI, Anthropic, Databricks, SpaceX, Neuralink, and plenty of other incredible businesses. So today, I'm pleased to be joined by Mitesh Agrawal. So he is the CEO of Positron. We'll go through a couple of stories today. And maybe just talk to the audience about what is Positron, why you're excited, and what the outlook for the business is. What's the North Star?
Yeah. Look, I think we Positron AI designs and builds silicon for inference applications, especially the frontier inference applications. Very, very large models. People are starting to hear terms like Anthropic Mythos 10 trillion parameter model. Kind of people say AGI is going to be 100 trillion parameters. So this kind of very large models. Video generation models. So these type of models are very memory intensive. They require a lot of memory capacity, very fast memory, and that's what we are designing. We're designing our silicon to be very, very optimized, both from performance perspective, translating that into performance per dollar, but then also from a power consumption perspective, especially given the energy constraints of the world, towards those applications, really trying to expand the Pareto curve. Look, Nvidia is the dominant player in the market and will continue to be. So you have to find a way to kind of expand their Pareto curve around them, coexist with them. And that's kind of what we're doing in this very large, very kind of frontier model. So Positron AI is a 3-year-old company. We've had our first product out now for about half a year or so, and really hurtling towards getting our second product out early parts of next year. So that's where we're at.
I can imagine that the pace in the office with shipping product, raising capital, hiring, all these things require a lot of intensity. What are the biggest challenges that you have in those types of things? What are the bottlenecks, and how do you get through them?
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing I would say in this infrastructure space, right? Like if you look at the world of AI, it's been kind of built on like 3 main pillars. You have the energy infrastructure side of thing, you have the AI models and data, and then you have this kind of silicon and networking compute side of piece, which has actually been the biggest value aggregator, right? Obviously led by Nvidia and now the most highest valued company in the world. But if you look at AMD, if you look at companies like Credo, which is a networking company, all of these companies have really gained in values. There's been a tremendous growth in the ecosystem, which is really great for companies to come and participate in. On one side, it makes it really tough because you have massive existing players that have very smart people. So getting into your question about challenges, it basically creates 2 challenges to entering a very exciting market. One is talent. You have kind of people at Broadcom, Nvidia, Google, not only just financially very large packages, but obviously seeing the large impacts that they are having, right? Deploying and deploying millions and millions of chips, and getting them to align with your vision, around building something new, building something exciting that can stand on its own feet in the world of NVIDIA's. It's both exciting, but it also requires a certain type of persuasion. Also, they have to think beyond just kind of, capital, finances. They have to think about what the potential company can be worth from equity side and things like that. So that's always a challenge. I can tell you that it's a very interesting challenge. It's a time that I spend a lot of my time on in terms of talking to people, getting them into the company. The second one is the true bottleneck, is the true supply chain bottleneck. You think about the vastness of the company. India over, almost running now over $300 billion of revenue run rate per year. AMD at tens of billions of dollars, Google at, tens of billions of dollars for their chip business kind of thing. These companies have kind of locked in supply chain of the major components, whether it's chips, silicon, memory, every small portion that goes into that for multiple years. The challenge is, either how do you solve it, how do you get access to it, or how do you innovate around it? How do you use certain components that these guys don't use, put that into your silicon, and still have the silicon be competitive in terms of performance, right? So it's a very, very you not only just have to think technically, like you have to innovate technically at a new architectural level, but you also have to think about this kind of supply chain components and where can you solve it from true old-fashioned operational excellence. How can you get allocation to it by talking to companies, by your relationships, and how can you solve it by true technical innovation or excellence, which is how do you use components that these guys don't use so that you don't stand in line behind these behemoths to get it. So I would say those are the two largest challenges. As I said, we are very lucky to be in this market. The pace of infrastructure growth is so massive that that's actually the excitement part of it that makes you solve those challenges. That gives you motivation to go and take those challenges head on.
Yeah, one thing we always look for in founder CEOs is the person a good saleswoman or salesman? Because ultimately, while nobody really thinks that in terms of the founder CEO of a technology company, as you know, and as you just alluded to, a lot of the time you are acting as a salesperson, whether it's getting more customers, getting people to buy into your vision for what the company will be in 5 years, where you fit in the ecosystem. So all of this is about being a fantastic salesperson. And I do believe that that is the rarest skill, more so than the technical capability of the founder. I think there's a lot of technically capable founder, CEO, heads of product, etc. But the ability to combine that with the sales skills, I think is just so rare. And we always look for that. So with that said, tell me about your very first win.
Yeah. First of all, just like a quick comment on the sales motion. I also truly believe that a true long-term company, a scale-out company, can only be produced by having like real revenue, real financial structure to it, which means selling the products that the company makes, whether it's services, products, whichever way you look at it. And, as I mentioned, I came into Positron as a CEO. I was CEO at Lambda before, and one of the reasons why, as I think at Positron AI, I really was attracted and why the original founder of the company, Thomas Summers, who is now the CTO, really wanted me is that yin and yang of both of us are technical. He's obviously a brilliant chip architect, but I think for him also, like he wanted to grow out the sales of it because AI silicon companies have traditionally struggled to actually generate revenue. They're big R&D companies. They promise a lot, and it's been troublesome to raise revenue of the company, and that's kind of where I spend a lot of my time is growth of the company and growing that. And happy to say that we have kind of been giving early indications of revenue into the company. We've had a big deal announced with Oracle recently. We have a few other customers. One of our customers co-led our Series B. So a lot of things. But because this is about very first win, and you brought up, I will speak about my very first win, which really kickstarted me into a world of understanding how to grow kind of hyperscaler or very large company revenue, like kind of go big or go home kind of mentality strategy around the sales motion. And the very first win that I have like a very strong memory of, like obviously there are like some smaller wins that goes into the very first win, but really the very first and very large win that I recall is selling to Microsoft Research when I was at Lambda, which is my previous company to Positron. I was COO there, co-founded Lambda Cloud, and we really built out. We really established around selling kind of this GPU systems as a service, as a cloud service, as an on-demand service to machine learning researchers, to machine learning teams, to machine learning companies for their computing requirements. So like Dell, HP, your traditional kind of IT vendors didn't back then really understand what deep learning was. They didn't understand that this parallel GPU. Now everyone knows it. Obviously, everyone knows 10,000 and 100,000 GPU clusters, and everyone talks about it. But this is back in 2018, 2019 timeframe when machine learning was just taking off in a way. The primary application people used to talk about was computer vision, for self-driving. So my very first win, and that win, that the reason I call it my very first win is my very first $100 million plus kind of revenue deal. And I think that's, thing that was like unlocked in me what it takes to, as a very, very small company, Lambda at that point of time was barely few tens of millions, maybe touching $100 million revenue valuation marker. How do you kind of deal with a behemoth, which is Microsoft, which is a multi-trillion dollar company at the point in time? And how do you kind of go through and convert them into being your customer, into believing your technology? So that's my very first win that I would like to cover.
With stories like that, there's always, we'll call it secrets or things the things that you were able to do behind the scenes or that other people wouldn't think of to get these things achieved? Because when you have wins like that, where you're landing a massive customer for the first time or whatever it is, there's just always a story between the lines. So I'd imagine you maybe have something like that you look back on as a lesson, whatever. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, 100%. The interesting thing is the secret here is something that most people wouldn't, assign it a secret to a big $100 million deal, but this is exactly how it happens. In 2018 December, myself and the co-founder of Lambda, Steven, we went to NeurIPS, which is the largest now machine learning conference. But again, in 2018, you place yourself back almost like 7, 8 years ago, where this was just like a primary research conference. People used to come present their posters, their talks, their research ideas. This used to be primarily PhD and master's researchers, either working in labs, in colleges, in academic settings, or researchers into like big labs, Google, Microsoft, Meta, these kind of companies, right? But it's a primary research conference. And because Stephen and mine and at that point in time, Robert Brooks, who was just our kind of, he was like the first employee into the company, that was like motivated towards sales. Like, kind of before that, we were just a few engineers, 5 engineers in the company. Robert came in as our sixth or seventh employee and was our first kind of salesperson. So the three of us were at the conference, sharing bunk beds, and so on and so forth. But it was a research conference. And what happened was we had this small little booth that we had taken at the conference. And we obviously were there to both hire people, but also to really educate people around what Lambda is, what are we building. And a researcher from Microsoft research team, so they have their internal AI research team, Bing research team, that they came and walked by us, and they were like, hey, what do you do? They were just chatting, we were talking about their paper, and they basically just started talking around their requirement for GPUs and how they'd require this big kind of deployments and how they're struggling to get, internally they're struggling to get allocation to Microsoft Azure because at that point of time, the GPU deployments were really not large, and they were really wanting to see how can they get something to be done very fast. And that was it. Like when they said the word like, hey, we need to deploy something very quickly, we said, okay, we can get you the GPU machines very, very quickly. We can deploy it. We can get it up and running. We can kind of integrate into your Microsoft Azure kind of backplane. And the researchers' eyes kind of lit up because it was very obvious to us at that point of time that their entire research was kind of being bottlenecked by having access to compute. And we were this small little company that we're willing to solve for it. And that researcher, luckily for us, and this is kind of the secret sauce, is like people generally expect like, a lot of kind of influence coming from executives, maybe the CEO of a company, maybe CIO of a company, CTO of a company. But these researchers and his team was very important to Microsoft. And they basically kind of bulldozed through all red tapes or bottlenecks that we would have otherwise faced going and selling into Microsoft. Because you have to imagine when you're selling into Microsoft, it's not just the technology. You have to show, okay, operationally, are you, efficient enough to actually deliver that? Can you actually take on $100 million PO? Do you have the balance sheet to do all that? And the answer to all that was no, right? We didn't have a balance sheet of more than a few single-digit $1 million to take on $100 million order. How are you going to order all the supply chain components for it? We didn't have any kind of proven operational efficiency around deploying for very large customers. All of those answers were kind of no, 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 no. But because we were solving this one critical problem for what at that point in time was one critical team for Microsoft, it kind of helped us bulldoze that through. And obviously, you have to keep on playing. You have to be in the arena, I guess, as people call it. But really, you have to really find that pain point. And for us, it came from being at a research conference. We've never since then ever missed that conference. Now it is the world's foremost, not only just research, but commercial, marketing, whatever you want to call it. Some people don't like the fact that it has become so commercial. Look, I get it. But the point is, the fact is, it is the most important conference in the world. And just having that insight that being there is very valuable. I think a lot of companies that were in that space, I don't recall Dell HP being there back in 2018 ever. And so they never really understood kind of in early days how to do that. It's not to say that they missed out on it. Obviously, Dell is growing massively. It's just the fact that it allowed Lambda to grow is my point there.
Great story. If you're not in front of people, you don't exist. And so you were in
Yeah.
front of people at the right time and you made it happen. Thank you so much for joining today, Mitesh. Really appreciate it. And congratulations on everything. It's a fantastic business.
Thank you, Rob. I really appreciate your time.
Cheers.